And here you see another member of the Brazilian Congress, José Medeiros, who has also been banned from Instagram. There are very few people I actually come to hate in politics. I'm a harsh critic of many people, but generally I don't take it personally. I don't hate or love anyone in politics or journalism. He's an exception, José Medeiros. I have contempt for him. I went to testify before the Brazilian Congress in the middle of the reporting I did in 2019, and he said absolutely grotesque things about my family, about my husband. He's a repulsive individual. And yet I am offended at the idea that an elected member of Congress can just be ordered by an unelected judge off of a platform without so much as offering any kind of rationale. We have on several occasions since our show debuted less than a month ago reported on what has become the uniquely repressive censorship regime in Brazil, in which a single judge on the Supreme Court has ordered countless people, including elected members of Congress, journalists, analysts, activists, and a whole wide range of others, banned not from one social media platform, but from all social media platforms. And we have explained over and over why it is that this censorship regime is so uniquely threatening. And in fact, although this censorship regime has been overwhelmingly, not entirely, but overwhelmingly directed at the Brazilian right and supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro, it is such an alarming censorship regime that even the New York Times, leading up to the election on 2 separate occasions, has issued warnings in the form of news reports about how excessive and unlimited this judge's powers have become. And we've reported on that before, but tonight there is a radical new escalation of the censorship regime in the form of a previously secret order that was issued just today. There's nothing about our show that is scripted. We learned of this order just a few hours ago, spent most of our time consulting with specialists in Brazilian law, but also our own lawyers, to ensure that we are able to report on this. And I have to say, as somebody who has reported in multiple countries, confronted multiple governments, been threatened by governments, there has never been a case in my entire journalistic career where I found myself hesitating before criticizing a political official the way I find myself sometimes hesitating when I go to question or criticize the powers wielded by this one specific judge, Alexandre de Moraes. That is how repressive and threatening by design this entire censorship regime is. It's not just about banning people from the internet. He has ordered members of Congress arrested, activists and journalists arrested with no trial. People are in exile out of fear of his orders. The entire time, many people, including myself, were concerned about authoritarianism from the Bolsonaro government, given his history, Jair Bolsonaro's history of anti-democratic statements. And there were acts of his government I consider authoritarian, including the government's attempt to imprison me for reporting I did in 2019. But just as happened in the United States, where institutions of power united in the name of stopping Donald Trump and concluded that everything and anything they do, no matter how authoritarian, is justified in the name of stopping Trump, Brazilian institutions, establishment institutions, have done the same in the name of stopping not just Bolsonaro, but the Bolsonaro movement, to the point where all kinds of censorship and imprisonment without due process and searches and seizures of people's homes are being done without even the pretense of due process. So let's get to this new order tonight. I will show you exactly what it says. We don't want to show you the hard copy of the order because oftentimes if you do that, it can reveal who the source is that provided it to you. And since the judge not only issued a repressive order, but within it ordered the targets of this order to keep secret what it was that he ordered them to do and gave them 2 hours to comply, we want to make sure to protect our sources. But as a journalist, I feel I have the right. That my lawyers made clear, it's not entirely 100% clear that I have it. I'm nonetheless taking it to report this and publicize this order, notwithstanding his demand that it be maintained in secrecy. I'm not a party to this order. He hasn't ordered journalists to do so, only these social media platforms. So I want to protect our source. We've translated the order from Portuguese, where it was obviously issued, into English, and I'm now about to show it to you in its full and complete form. So At the top, you can see it on the screen. It notes the investigation number of the case from the federal district, which is where the court is situated in Brazil. You see there the name of the judge, Minister Alexandre de Moraes. He's one of the members of the Brazilian Supreme Court. And then author, prosecutor, investigator, and lawyer. It all says under legal secret. So not even the names of the people who brought this action, who are the lawyers involved. Everything is completely secret upon his order, including the contents of the order itself. Now, it's addressed to 6 different companies. Facebook, and specifically Facebook's company that is Brazilian in nature that operates Facebook in Brazil. That's number 1. Number 2, Rumble, which is the platform on which this show is aired and is currently airing exclusively. The 3rd is Telegram, which is the service that is designed to ensure not only anonymity, but also to protect people's free speech rights from the attempt by authoritarian governments and authoritarian censors to silence them. The 4th is TikTok, the 5th is Twitter, and the 6th is YouTube. So 6 different companies, none of which is Brazilian other than the Brazilian version of Facebook. These are all foreign social media companies, and at least in the case of Rumble, Rumble has no ties to Brazil at all. It has no office in Brazil. It has no marketing campaigns that are aimed at Brazilians. Brazilians are allowed, like everyone else in the world, to join Rumble if they wish. There's a Brazilian program in particular from a very popular podcast host who became the topic of this order, but Rumble doesn't exist in Brazil. It has no bank accounts in Brazil. It has no physical offices in Brazil, and yet this order purports to compel not just Rumble, but all of these other companies to obey the censorship order of a single Brazilian judge. So he's not only acting as censor of Brazil, but apparently of the entire world. The order reads, Mr. Director, it's a loose translation, quote, this is the judge in his order. I hereby communicate to you that the following decision was made in the judicial action, the details of which remain under legal secret for immediate compliance. And you see there, immediate is in all capital letters, which is how it appears in the order itself. So we're not only ordering you to do this and keep it secret, but we're ordering you to comply immediately in the following terms. And here's what the order says, quote, considering the following facts, I hereby determine the expedition of legal communications to the company's Facebook, Rumble, Telegram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube, so that within the deadline of 2 hours, he's given them 2 hours to obey, proceed with the blocking of the channels, accounts, and profiles listed below under the sanction of a daily fine of 100,000 Brazilian reais, which is roughly the equivalent of $20,000 a day, and the providing to the Supreme Court of the registration data associated with those accounts, as well as the maintenance of the contents. So the order directs these 6 companies to do 3 things. Number 1, immediately or generously within 2 hours, completely ban not specific posts that have been deemed illegal, but to ban the entire account, to prohibit all of these individuals from speaking on these platforms, whether or not they have violated the platform's rules themselves. That's the first command. Immediately ban all of these individuals from being able to speak on your platform, whether you want to or not. Number 2, provide to us all of the data associated with these accounts. Whatever information they provided to you, their address, their telephone number, their legal name, everything about them, we demand that you turn over to us. And then number 3, we require you to preserve the content of all of these accounts, to keep them, not allow them to be deleted. Even if the people want them deleted, you are required to preserve them all. And then, of course, embedded in that is a 4th command, which is, you may think this is really repressive, you may disagree vehemently with the order we're giving you, but you are nonetheless prohibited from disclosing publicly what we've demanded you to do. So presumably, if they obey the order and remove all of these people, some of whom are elected members of Congress in Brazil, others of whom are journalists and commentators and activists, if those people come and say, why did you just destroy my livelihood? why did you just take down my page? Presumably, they're not allowed to say it's because we were ordered to by Judge Moraes. They're required to maintain complete secrecy about the censorship order itself. Now, here then come the list of all the accounts that each social media company is compelled to immediately ban. So under Facebook, here you see the second item is the Facebook page of a Brazilian politician named Nicolas Ferreira. Nicolas Ferreira is a 26-year-old Brazilian who's a supporter of President Jair Bolsonaro. He became a popular social media star on both YouTube and TikTok and Facebook, and he converted that popularity into a successful run for Congress. He was just elected at the age of 26 to the Brazilian Congress. Obviously, he was elected by the Brazilian people who chose him as the person they want representing him in the democratic bodies of Brazil. Not only was Nicolas Ferreira someone with whom I have not just disagreements, but I can't think of a single matter on which I agree with Nicolas Ferreira, other than perhaps the evil of censorship. But not only did he win in his campaign, he received 1.4 million votes. 1.4 million Brazilians in his state voted for him to represent them in Congress, which happened to be, by a good margin, the greatest number of people, the highest vote total any congressional candidate in Brazil received this year. There are tens of thousands of people who run for Congress across Brazil, each trying to represent their state in order to represent, to become a member of Congress. And of these tens of thousands of people who ran, this one individual, Nicolas Ferreira, received the most votes of any other candidate in Brazil on the left or the right. And now, by order of the Supreme Court, despite no trial, presumably not having been notified of any of this, just like a person whom we're about to interview, despite being part of this order, was never notified, he is now banned from appearing on essentially all social media sites that have any audience by an order of a single Supreme Court justice who was elected by nobody. That is the list here. The last person on that list of Facebook is a gentleman by the name of Alan Rick. Alan Rick is a journalist in Brazil. He, I believe, is a lawyer. I'll check that. He is a evangelical pastor, and he has been a member of Congress, an elected member of Congress since 2014. So every 4 years, they're required to run for re-election. So he was elected in 2014 to represent his constituents. He was re-elected in 2018. And then this year, he ran for the Senate, which requires at least 1 million votes in order to win. I don't know his exact vote total, but he was elected to the Senate. So he's now a senator-elect, having moved from the Congress where he served since 2014 to the Senate. He too, by order that has no trial, no due process, is now banned from speaking on major social media platforms by an order of a single judge without due process, someone who was just elected as a senator. Here on Instagram, you see Monarch. He became so popular on YouTube that every single Brazilian politician, left and right, was desperate to get on his show. I've been on that show, I think, 3 times, but many, many people, including the highest level politicians, were going on that show. And then Monarch got banned last year from YouTube because he opined that he disagrees with the laws in Brazil that give the government the power to ban certain political parties, including the Nazi Party. He was making very clear he's not a supporter of the Nazi Party. He's not a Nazi. He hates Nazism. He just doesn't think the state should have the right to ban political parties. In other words, he took the position that the United States government and its Supreme Court and Constitution has taken, which is that obviously in the United States, the state has no power to ban political parties, including the Nazi Party. He took that position and said he believes that should be in Brazil, and that was considered such a grave offense that he was banned from almost every single platform, including YouTube, which is where he had made his living. And when Rumble heard about that story, Rumble offered him the platform to move his show to Rumble. He's not part of the Bolsonaro movement. He hasn't been suggesting that anybody go and engage in revolution against the Brazilian government. He's not part of any coup. And yet this order has ordered that Monarch, despite his millions of fans, be removed not just from Instagram, but also you see there from Rumble. So Rumble is where he went to put his show, because Rumble is a free speech platform which believes, unlike big tech, that everyone with views across the spectrum has a right to be heard. Rumble believes it is not in the position of deciding truth or falsity. So Monarch has had his show on Rumble for, I believe, 7 or 8 months. It's gathered a big audience. And now this one single unelected judge in Brazil is telling Rumble, along with Instagram, that they are no longer permitted to host Monarch's show or anything that Monarch wants to say. He is apparently banned from being heard on Rumble, even if Rumble wants to hear him, or wants him to be heard, or wants to give a platform to everybody, including him. Rumble is a company that was founded in 2013 by a Canadian citizen, Chris Pavlovsky. It has offices in the United States. It just became a publicly traded company on the American stock market. But Rumble does not have a physical presence in Brazil. I believe there are 2 or 3 Brazilians who even use the platform. At the same time, Monarch went there, a leftist commentator who lives in a São Paulo favela and has become very popular and well known for reporting on life in the favelas of São Paulo, and also moved his show to Rumble. His name is Farhaz. And so now this judge is telling Rumble, a company that has nothing to do with Brazil, reaching across the world and telling them, you need to remove this person from your platform with no explanation, no allegation that he broke the law, that he did anything else, just an order that you have 2 hours to remove him, or else we're going to fine you every day. How does this judge have the right to go around fining companies all over the world if they don't obey his censorship orders? And here you see another member of the Brazilian Congress, José Medeiros, who has also been banned from Instagram. Now, I just have to say, José Medeiros, there are very few people I actually come to hate in politics. I'm a harsh critic of many people, but generally I don't take it personally. I don't hate or love anyone in politics or journalism. I save that for my personal life and my family, where I love people or react emotionally. He's an exception, José Medeiros. I have contempt for him. I went to testify before the Brazilian Congress in the middle of the reporting I did in 2019, and he said absolutely grotesque things about my family, about my husband. He's a repulsive individual. And yet I am offended at the idea that an elected member of Congress can just be ordered by an unelected judge off of a platform without so much as offering any kind of rationale. Then you see Telegram, which exists to provide secrecy and protection, and you see that Congressman-elect Ferreira has been ordered off Telegram, along with Monarch as well. TikTok, the same thing. Nicolas Ferreira, the person who just got elected with the biggest vote total, Monarch as well. And now you see from Twitter a long list of people, including Monarch, Senator-elect Rick, Congressman Medeiros, Congressman-elect Nicolas Ferreira. I checked at least some of these pages on Twitter right before I came on air, and I believe all the ones I checked have already been suspended. Now, what's amazing about this is that, as I said, this order, which I just read to you in its entirety, contains not even citation to a law, no allegation that the person has broken any law, no contention that they've been given due process or tried, they've had any opportunity to defend themselves. A lot of them, this is their livelihood. This is how they earn their living. They're journalists and analysts. They host shows and are paid for that through their audience. And with the snap of a finger, without any offer of explanation, this judge has said, all these people are to be gone from your platform within 2 hours. Now, here is the final paragraph of the order. Quote, considering the confidential nature of these documents, appropriate steps should be taken to maintain confidentiality. So he's directing these social media sites to keep this order confidential. Quote, with nothing more for the moment, I take the opportunity to renew my vows of high esteem and consideration. Signed, Justice Alessandro de Moraes. Now here you see This senator on Twitter, it says his account has been withheld in Brazil in response to a legal demand. Here, as well as a Bolsonarista influencer, her account has been withheld in Brazil. Here is Monarch, who also has had his account withheld in Brazil in response to a legal demand. Now, as I said earlier, the New York Times, which is not exactly an opponent of censorship, they've been quite supportive of the union between big tech and the U.S. security state in the United States. Most of the time when the New York Times writes about big tech censorship, it's to complain they're not censoring enough. They have a tech unit who are strong believers and agitators and activists for a censorship regime. And most of the time when they write about censorship, it's to say we demand more of it. But here was an article, a great article, not by Brazil's tech team, but by the reporter who is the bureau chief of the New York Times, the chief of the New York Times Bureau. And he wrote this article reporting on this debate, and the title of it was, Chief, to defend democracy, is Brazil's top court going too far? And the subheadline is, Brazil's Supreme Court has acted as the primary check on President Jair Bolsonaro's power. Now many are worried that the court is posing its own threat. In other words, people, as I said, were concerned about Jair Bolsonaro, but as it turns out, according to the New York Times, not me, the real worry is the authoritarianism of Brazil's Supreme Court, and particularly this single judge, and evidently deciding that Brazil can no longer afford to have free speech in light of what he regards as the political dangers of people's opinions. Now, I can tell you for a fact that this judge, Alexandre de Moraes, used to be hated by the Brazilian left. And the reason is because in 2016, the left-wing president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached by the Congress, and that impeachment was upheld by the Supreme Court. I was vehemently opposed to that impeachment at the time. In fact, I created the Brazilian version of The Intercept primarily to give space to the dissent against that impeachment because the entire establishment was united behind it. And the government that replaced her was viewed as, by the Brazilian left, as a coup government, an illegitimate government. Alexandre de Moraes was the justice minister in this coup government, and he ended up on the Supreme Court because he was appointed by what the Brazilian left considered the coup leader, Michel Temer, an illegitimate president, to this court. So they hated him forever. He was also a major advocate of the anti-corruption probe that led to the imprisonment of Lula da Silva. So the Brazilian left hated him until he took on the role of chief censor and began censoring apparently almost everybody who the Brazilian left regards as their enemy, especially Bolsonaro supporters, including ordering members of Congress arrested and journalists having their homes searched and seized. And now he's a hero to the Brazilian left. In fact, earlier this week on Twitter, I questioned whether or not his powers have become too excessive, just like the New York Times did here. And I trended on Brazil on Twitter for 2 days, being accused of being a defender of terrorists, meaning the people who invaded those buildings. Does that sound familiar to you? If you're an American, it should. After 9/11, the climate was created that anyone who questioned what Bush and Cheney were doing in the name of protecting us from the terrorists themselves was a sympathizer of Al-Qaeda or was pro-terrorist. That's the climate that exists now in Brazil. If you question this judge, you will be called a defender of fascism, even though what this judge is most known for is this very extreme censorship regime. The one thing you can't accuse me of is being a fan of the Bolsonaro movement. As I said, in 2019 and 2020, the reporting I did with my colleagues that helped free Lula from prison and proved that Bolsonaro's justice minister had acted corruptly was reporting that they ultimately indicted me on and tried to imprison me on. And the irony of that is that it showed abuse by the judiciary. For 5 years, the critique that I heard from the Brazilian left was, we're living under judicial tyranny, meaning Judge Moro and the anti-corruption probe. And so when the Brazilian government tried to imprison me for reporting on that corruption by the judiciary that apparently is now off limits from criticism, they copied the indictment of Julian Assange that the United States government brought. The theory that they used to try and imprison Assange is the theory the Brazilian government copied to try and imprison me. Namely that when I cooperated with my source, when I tried to help my source avoid detection, when I encouraged my source to provide more information, according to them and their allegation, I became part of the conspiracy. These governments copy one another. And so when they see this judge in Brazil essentially imposing a repressive censorship regime, unlike anywhere else in the democratic world, that can reach over to other social media companies across the world like France is trying to do, you can be absolutely sure that your government and other governments will see that, see how well it's working from the perspective of crushing all dissent, including dissent against the government, and will begin copying it as well. There's lots of reasons to care about this extremely new disturbing order that was supposed to be secret until we reported it. You should care just on the grounds that people in Brazil deserve free speech and free press rights. But you should also care because a free internet is the most valuable innovation we have against fighting against establishment power and entrenched authorities. And just like the Snowden reporting was about the surveillance that is being done to ruin internet freedom, this censorship is designed to ruin it even further.